This is the Clutch Picks betting podcast presented by ClutchPoints. Like, follow, and subscribe. Rate us, review us, all that other fun stuff. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined by my guy, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Matt Russell, sports betting professional and creator of The Window, available on Substack and via podcast. Mr. Russell, we are into championship weekend. How are you?
Yes, sir. I'm good, better than you. You referred to me as myth, something of a mythological creature. You might be sort of a ghost-like spirit at this point over there. So, you know what though? It's championship weekend, so my guy, just hop on my back here. Hop on my back. Let me carry you to the end zone, like I don't know, James Cook.
Woke up a little groggy. The throat's a little messed up. The head's a little sore.
Raspy.
For those people unaware, it's been like minus 30 the last 3 days in the Toronto areas. Just lots going on. Body not reacting well to it. It'll get you. That minus 30 will get you. Who knew?
One way or another. You can hide, which I do.
I tried.
It'll come in and get you. Yeah.
Didn't work.
You did the best you could, but it'll get you.
I was going to say something that I should not say on an open mic, so I will just move on.
They got delirious shell. I like it.
Right? Oh, man. Folks that might be new to this podcast, of course, it's conference championship picks coming up here. And if you're new to the pod, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you my pick to each and every game. Matt comes in with the information, education on where the line was, where it is, and where it could be going heading into kickoff. The hope is I come out on the other side with a much more informed pick. I try to play the role of the viewer. And Matt sometimes convinces me to change my pick, and other times I foolishly don't listen. But that's the joke. That's the bit. That's the show. We're here. Then there were 4 teams, my friend. And after last week, I had a 1-2-1 week, which we'll get into some weird, wonky lines of last week's finishes. We'll get there. Season total, 135, 140, and 7. Just a weird season for me here on the picks. But we try to finish up strong, because that's what we do here on said podcast. We start with the NFC Championship game. The Commanders are heading to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. Eagles 6-point favorites at home. I'm going to say this, Mr. Russell. I am on the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the Commanders are a great story. Amazing story. Jane Daniels is the truth. But I do feel as if last week was more about the Lions flopping. The Lions' injuries on defense, Goff throwing picks, Goff getting concussed, the Lions coaches not adjusting to the game that they were in as opposed to how they always play, meaning, hey, we're blitzing Jane Daniels and it's not working. How about we switch up our game plan? Nah, let's keep doing the same thing. You know what else might work? Our receiver trying to throw into double coverage. Who knew he'd throw a pick? Whoops. Like all of these things that we get, cool plays, this is what you do. I say all that to say, I feel like not to take too much away from the Commanders because they did what they're supposed to do. They won. They put up points. Credit to them. But I do think that a lot of that game was about the Lions because the Lions still were in a position where they could have won that game. And, of course, my phone's going to go off because that's just – how long have we done this pod? And has my phone ever gone off in the middle?
That's right. Not once.
Right?
Not once.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. But I say all that to say, last week I think was more about the Lions, and even with all that, the Lions were still in a position to win that game. Whereas this week against the Eagles, I feel like not letting Jalen Hurts do too much could actually help them. Do you know what I mean? Just focus, run the ball, make your checkdowns, do what you're supposed to do, ball control, let your defense do what your defense has done. And I'll give you credit. I'll start you off here because I'll give you credit. The Eagles' defense has improved throughout the season. And you said very early on, Fangio being there, it might take a little while, but he's going to have them playing. And that's what we've seen for the majority of the second half of this season. For all of those reasons, I'm on the Philadelphia Eagles. It's less than a touchdown. I like that. It's also going to be outside. Who knows what the weather's going to be like? I'm not sure yet. But we're asking a lot here of Jane Daniels. I'm almost daring Jane Daniels to win this game, back-to-back massive upsets, and make the
Right.
Super Bowl in his rookie year. Eagles
Right.
-6.
Yeah. Yeah, where you sit back and you're just like, yeah, man, like if you can do it, like go ahead and do it. Like
Yeah.
let's see it, right? And we get to these championship level games where a lot of the time, right, the point spread doesn't really come into play. Like if you are going to cover as an underdog, you're probably just going to win the game outright. And if you're going to cover as the favorite, it means, or if you're going to win as the favorite, it probably means that you played pretty well. And if you played pretty well, you're probably going to cover a point spread that a lot of the times is brought down close to pick 'em because of the success of the underdog. And that's what we saw here. And you mentioned like people getting a little excited about the Commanders, maybe a little too excited. You know who else did? Odds makers. This line opened -4.5 when it came out on Sunday, right? And it's like, whoa, hold on a second, because you don't have to go far to kind of figure out what the line kind of quote unquote should have been, right? And so let me kind of take you through it here, right? So Commanders on the road against Detroit. What's the line? 9.5, 8.5, kind of depending on whether you were going to, as an odds maker, protect against teaser potential there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had that interesting scenario last Saturday, where you could have had two teams at -8.5 dragged down to -2.5 via teaser. Bit of a red flag situation anytime that kind of happens, because you go like, oh man, like one of these teams is going to blow this one way or another. And for a second there, I thought it was going to be the Chiefs only winning by 1 point because of Kaimi Fairbairn missing an extra point. But of course, didn't end up being that way. And just the way things go, you had to kind of be on red alert for the Lions to at least be in a fist fight. Because that game was available at -8.5 earlier on in the week. At the time we did the podcast, I believe, right? I think there's about a 24-hour period where it was -8.5. And the other sort of interesting little anecdote in all of this is that after the Chiefs game started, the line went from 9.5 down to 8.5. Meaning as soon as you couldn't tease the Chiefs down to 2.5 with the Lions, odds makers are like, all right, cool, we're allowed to put the line back to kind of where it should be, which is 8.5. Right? Kind of an interesting kind of thing there, where it was like, well, if you can't tease anything with it, suckers, we're going to be able to put the line where it should be. So while the line was 9.5 for much of the week, really the true line in all that game, and I think we talked about it last week, with the idea being, hey, you're getting value at +9.5 here, but it has to land on 9 for you to really take that value and actually make money off of it. Of course, it's the first game of the day, the Chiefs game, that goes and lands on 9, and for reasons that we'll talk about here in a second. So, but the point is even if you made that line 8, right? Even if you sort of threw another half point the Commanders' way against the Lions, who's the better team, the Lions or the Eagles? And I think all season long, depending on health and all of that sort of thing, we've kind of battled between not knowing who the better team was between the Lions and the Eagles, right? There were points in the season where you're worried about the Lions defense, where you'd be like, man, I think this Eagles team is the better team. And then, of course, there were other points where it was like, I think the Lions are the best team in the league and or NFC. All that is to say, well, if it was even a fair number at 8 last week, you're going to come to me this week and tell me -4.5 for the Commanders on the road is a fair number? Like, that's not even close to 8. So that was an instant thing where it's like, before even thinking about the game and matchups and who's injured and who's not, obviously assuming that Jalen Hurts is going to be healthy and able to play, you just go -4.5, like, yes, Eagles, like, I'll see what happens, where this line goes, whatever, but I'm pretty confident it's going up instead of come down. And sure enough, within, I think, 24 hours after the open, we saw this thing go all the way to 6, even sort of teeter on 6.5. There's kind of some juiced 6.5 happening over at one sports book right now, and has for a day or so now. And so the thing is like there's only so high that number could go. Right? Because eventually all of the people who hopped in at -4.5, right? The people who pushed it up, like, that's why it moved up. It didn't just move up for fun. People bet the -4.5. Eventually a handful of those people are going to be looking to take Washington coming back the other way if it got to, say, 7, right? Because you're sitting there with Eagles -4.5 and Commanders hypothetically at +7. And yeah, that's a pretty big middle for games that, I don't know if you've noticed, are pretty darn close to the point spreads for the most part, other than this Commanders-Lions game, right? So you're never going to get kind of the fair spread here, which I don't think it's 8, because I mean the Commanders won that game outright, and you have to give them credit for that. And then of course you do have some injury concerns with regards to the Eagles. So I think 7 is probably the appropriate number in this game. We're just going to never see it because the odds makers put that number so low in the first place, and there's all kinds of reasons to buy back on the Commanders that have nothing to do with the actual football game, since we haven't actually talked about the football game just yet. So this thing is going to kind of stick at the ceiling of 6. And so I'm not going to talk you out of Philly -6 because I think that's the valuable bet, right? Because if I think the line should be 7, I would bet Philadelphia -6. It's the exact same question or issue that we had last week when the Rams, when we talked about it, were +6 and the Eagles were -6. Sure enough, what happened? By Sunday, that line goes to 7. Of course, it didn't have that, sort of synthetic need to be pulled back down, at +7. It just kind of went to 7 obviously on Philadelphia money, but there was no real reason to buy back because it was never -4.5 in the first place. So a bit of a different situation there. But again, we were off by a point last week, and so we took advantage of it, grabbing the Eagles -6. Then, of course, you get the scenario where Jake Elliott's out here missing extra points, and the game lands on 6. Those who came late to the party don't even get a push with the Eagles. Insane. And it turns into a huge, mess, right? So the other element is like, well, why did we get to -4.5 in the first place? Is it all about the Commanders, or is there some selling going on with the Eagles? And so you start playing around with the market ratings, because what we have this week is Super Bowl advanced lines. You can go to a certain sports book and see what the line theoretically would be, could be, whatever. You can bet into it now if you want, with all 4 different matchups. And if you play around with the Commanders' rating, you can kind of give them a couple more points. Obviously, they have this big upset on the road. And all that sort of equals out to about a 4.5-point spread against either the Bills and the Chiefs, who are basically rated like within a hair of each other. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. But the interesting thing is the Bills and the Chiefs are both favored at the moment against the Eagles by 1.5. There has not been a point all season long, really. I shouldn't say all season long, because early on in the season things got weird. But it's been like 2 or 3 months since
it's been a while.
Anybody had the Eagles rated below the Chiefs or the Bills. Obviously, the Chiefs had their weird 7 game in a row against the spread losing streak, and the Bills have sort of precipitously moved up over the course of the season from where they were at the start of the year. But really, the Eagles have been higher rated the whole time. And so when you look and using that as sort of the element there, you go, oh, this is an Eagles rating drop, which is why it went to 4.5, which is why it is still at 6. And so you have to ask yourself, like, are we really beating up the Eagles because they sort of didn't cover last week? And I just kind of go like, that seems really like a flimsy excuse, because, they could have been up 14 points with a, with a made extra point. And then obviously sort of the back door being kind of wide open, the snow being, a weird element.
Thing. And Matt Stafford balled in the snow.
Element. Yeah.
Matt Stafford balled in the snow, right? Like, you got to give Matt Stafford a lot of credit there. Yeah.
They finally figured out that the DBs have a hard time changing direction on pass plays, right? And they're like, well, okay, we're going to throw the ball every time anyway because we're down by 2 touchdowns. And it just kind of almost worked out completely, for them. Whereas, Barkley goes and he does just enough to give the Eagles that lead. And, of course, you had a couple of turnovers there in the snow, right? So the snow was giveth and taketh thing away there for the Rams. Where it was like, if you just hadn't turned the ball over and you had just been able to run those pass plays the way that you were late in the game with, by the way, the Eagles missing one of their top cornerbacks, rookie Quinyon Mitchell, it kind of really set up nicely for the Rams late in that game to be able to do stuff from a pass offense perspective. So if you're going to beat up the Eagles for all of that, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. And so again, that was another reason why I had to hop on the Eagles -4.5, early on. Of course, now you're going up against this Commanders team that, like you said, sort of bit of a fairy dust type situation, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's always a little bit scary. But as my cat runs around in the back here, electric show so far here, right? We got Sheldon with the phone and my guy Arthur bucking his head.
Everyone wants to be a part of the show,
Everyone wants to be. Championship weekend, man. Things keep popping. So I'm not going to talk you out of that. Obviously, I prefer my -4.5 to a -6. If we can get this thing down at some point over the weekend where, -5.5 kind of comes back, because maybe there's a lot of interest in the Commanders, sort of full stop. And if that sort of knocks this thing down from 6 to 5.5, then, that might be the difference. And you got Jake Elliott out here missing extra points. So, listen, there's a lot of stuff to bet on. I've got a bleep load of props available on the Substack article that is out right now. So there's a ton of stuff to bet on that is better than necessarily from a value perspective the side here. But I do think there is a little bit of value still on the Eagles. And then you just kind of hope, as you mentioned, right? Like the defense for the Eagles, light years difference than the Lions at current construction, right? And whether you blame that on injuries or the defensive coordinator who the Jets couldn't have hired fast enough when it comes to, a head coach. And then, there was some Ben Johnson up here in the videos, element to it, right? Where it was
Very
like,
much
let
so.
me show you how smart I am with all these play calls. And, the thing is with some of these play calls and trick plays that the Lions run, a lot of them are really window dressing on kind of a bare bones play. Right? Like the element of having Jameson Williams run an end around where he scores on a 61-yard touchdown is, oh my God, Teddy Bridgewater was under center for that. And it's like, if it's so basic that the backup quarterback can run the play, like it's probably not that sort of sneaky of a play. And
which is pretty crazy if you think about it too.
Well, it's like, okay, with all he really has to do is kind of hand the ball off or flip the ball off to a running back who then flips it off to Jameson Williams, and then you just let one of the fastest guys in the league be one of the fastest guys in the league. It's not that complicated. It just is sort of fun when it works. And it was the same thing for the shovel pass play that they ran. It's like, the running back can throw a shovel pass. We just never really thought of it as a society, but like it's not a particularly difficult play. And if it's incomplete, it's just incomplete. So who cares? But then you get to the point where you're having a guy who's not exactly known for his decision making in Jameson Williams, both on and off the field, right? And you decide, let's put the ball in his hands, not to do the thing that he's really good at, but to do something else entirely. That's where it just got too far. And so the last thing I'll sort of say on this game as we get into the next game is that all 4 teams that advanced last week, none of them turned the ball over. So like we can talk about like this mismatch or that mismatch or this, that, or whatever, right? But if you turn the ball over, like you just lose. And the Texans are getting credit for not turning the ball over. And people are like, oh, can you believe they outgained the Chiefs and didn't turn the ball over? I'm sorry, but going for a 55-yard field goal in like, frozen conditions with your Hawaiian indoor kicking kicker is a turnover.
Who's
and
shaky
going
at
for it
best.
on 4th and 10. Who's shaky at best. And at 4th and 10, with 10 minutes to go, like scrambling to get the play off, like that's a turnover. Like it's literally called a turnover on down. So just because the NFL is so antiquated that they don't call those things turnovers, like they are. And so all of those teams that have advanced this week were, avoided the turnover margin, right? Like we're on the plus side of the turnover margin. And I just look at it and go, okay, that's great for them. And if there are just absolutely no turnovers this week, then it just comes down to talent. And the Eagles have way more talent than the Commanders do at this moment. Obviously, the Commanders have the exciting quarterback and all of that, and the vibes are very high. But like, we saw that in the national title game on Monday, right? When no teams turned the ball over, Ohio State had the only turnover, I believe, in that game. And when it just comes down to like, all right, man, no high leverage plays are really involved, and we're just kind of like going drive for drive, the better team is going to win. And in this case, I think the better team probably covers.
And that's actually a perfect segue to the next game here, because I really do think what you said is so perfect, right? You have the moment in the playoffs where it's take care of the ball. But then if both teams are doing that, interesting. And that leads me perfectly into the Buffalo Bills, right? It leads me right to the Buffalo Bills, because Bills advance, they're taking on the Chiefs, and the Bills last week, credit where credit is due. Josh Allen was not wilding. He had the moment where he thought about pitching it back and he didn't, right? Credit where credit is due.
God, I wish. I want to know what happens. I want to know alternative universe. I just want to know what happens. Somebody,
the interesting part, they asked him about it after the game, or maybe it was the next day, whatever it was. And you could tell he was kind of shook by it. Like the question being asked, like he was kind of like, well, no, I didn't really think about it. And they're like, would the younger Josh Allen do that? And he was like, maybe, but I mean, I didn't do it. It was just a weird. Anyways, I say all that to say, no turnovers by the Bills, 2 massive turnovers by the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. And That's really the difference in that
total.
ball game. We look ahead here. We got the Bills as 2-point dogs heading into Kansas City. And I'm going to be on Kansas City for literally what you just said. Two teams not turning over the ball, which means I'm trusting the talent. And it's not just the talent of Mahomes being better than Josh Allen. It's not just the talent of what I would say the skill positions, but also the coaching staffs on both sides. And
Yeah.
I've given a lot of praise to what's my guy? Is it Joe Brady? He's a OC for Buffalo, and the job that he's done with Josh Allen in terms of limiting the mistakes, simplifying things for him, and he's done a great job. But now you need to go beat that guy, and you're going to need to do a little something more to beat that guy. And I just can't be in a spot here where I'm not taking the Chiefs because I need to see Buffalo beat the Chiefs in the playoffs before I bet on Buffalo beating the Chiefs in the playoffs.
Right.
Because when those plays need to be made, I've seen Andy Reid and company do it multiple times as I look at the San Francisco hat on my head and the one over my shoulder, and a slow tear comes down my face.
Right.
My point is, I've seen them do this time and time again where the game is close and they just need to make plays, and they got those plays. And I think this is what helps having a healthier Pacheco, and Kareem Hunt's had a good year. Run the ball control, keep Josh Allen off the field. And then if they have to come back, now you're getting a while in Josh Allen that has to come out at some point. And Spags is sitting there waiting.
Yeah, that's all super fair, right? Because it's every year. It's, well, the Bills beat him in the regular season, so like maybe this is it. And then it's like heartbreaking fashion, right? And it's like, thought it was their year this year, right? And so yeah, who's going to blame you if you just kind of keep rolling along with that? The betting market in this game way less complicated than the other one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's the line kind of teetering depending on where you look, -1.5 or -2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, theoretically insignificant numbers. So it is funny that it's kind of like 1.75 essentially between those two numbers, right? Like if you're dying to get +2, like you're gonna have to pay for, you know, the juice. And if you only want to lay -1.5, like you're gonna have to pay a little bit more juice. And it's like, okay, like maybe it comes down to it. I mean, it is the Chiefs, who knows? But like I think you're probably good if you like the Chiefs to just take the -2. And all of that comes down to the home field advantage, right?
Yeah.
Where it is literally like on average home field advantage in the betting market anyway is right around 1.75.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say, all right, which one of these teams is better? And it's like, well, we'll see where this ends up closing. But the difference between these two teams, if it's 2 flat, it's like a half of a non-relevant point, and you know, one way or another. And so like this thing is a 50-50 game that again the Chiefs are getting a little bit of credit for, obviously because of home field advantage. So you know, and then you go, okay, well, are these two teams equal? And it's like, man, the games are pretty good when they go up against each other, right? And it's been 3 years of, you know, basically playing twice a year. Obviously the Bills didn't hold up to their end of the bargain that one year when they lost to the Bengals. It's like, yeah, like there's nothing really to say that there's anything between these two teams. The real thing for me is stylistically, there is a difference. And for that, it's on the Chiefs side, you know, when they squeak by these games and the offense doesn't do all that much, we tend to go, well, the defense is like, you know, is really hanging on here. And that was the truth last year where they had, what was it, like number 1 or number 2 in a lot of the defensive metrics last year. This year, it's kind of been outside the top 10, which has made their record a little bit even, you know, sort of weirder because it's like, well, the defense isn't unbelievable, and Mahomes hasn't played unbelievable. So how do they have this unbelievable record? And so if you were going for the Bills here, like you would sort of point to that and be like, I'm not really super afraid of the defense, and I'm not really super afraid of the offense from like an electricity standpoint. I just know that they're going to play a game that doesn't involve a lot of screw-ups. Now you got the Bills, though. And so in years past, it was very much, you know, the Stephon Diggs element of the Bills, whereas like we're hucking it deep, we're going to be throwing it around. Josh might turn the ball over, but he's going to make some spectacular plays. And now all of a sudden it's this Bills offense where Josh can have 150 yards passing in only, you know, 30 or 40 yards rushing, and they can beat the Ravens because they don't turn the ball over. right? The Ravens turned the ball over 3 times in that game, and still it comes down to a Mark Andrews drop, which is sort of a turnover in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's actually a better sign for the Ravens. Unfortunately, it doesn't do them any good because they have to go home because they lost. But you just sit there and you go, like, I think the Ravens might have been better.
Yeah.
But again, like, you have to stop screwing stuff up.
Mhm.
And that's the case with a lot of these teams. I mean, 5 turnovers for the Lions. Like, just stop screwing stuff up. The Texans should have covered that game, but they did enough things to screw it up.
Mhm.
And so if we get the version of the Bills that isn't the screw-up version, then I do like the Bills a lot because you're kind of getting the worst version of the Chiefs of the last 3 years, where it isn't either awesome offense or awesome defense. It's just kind of figuring out how to win against the Bills team that has slowly and painfully tried to figure out how to win. So, like, I understand that the line is what the line is, and I don't disagree with the line. So I look at it and I go, okay, if I think that the Bills are going to sort of play in this way, where they're not going to have as much of a problem with the Chiefs defense as they have, even in the regular season games where they would win like 20-17, something along those lines, I think they're going to be able to score against the Chiefs. But the thing is, last week, and how the Bills were able to sort of slow down the Ravens, is they came up with a game plan. It involved a personnel change.
Yes.
What they did is, like, Teron Johnson, right? Top level, like, nickel corner. Like, he's in there 100% of the time. We've talked about how the Bills are kind of lightweight on defense because they play a lot of 4-2-5, and they have 5 DBs on the field a lot, and that's not really going to work all that great against the Ravens, who, beyond Derrick Henry, are just a really big team. Right? They get Patrick Ricard out there, and it's just like, and their offensive line is huge, and you're just like, man, there's just a lot of big dudes out here. Like, how are we supposed to tackle them? Last week, they did sort of a strange thing, which is, hey, we're going to take one of our best players, Teron Johnson, off the field for 40% of the snaps. When normally this guy plays like 97% of the snaps, he played like 61% of the snaps. All of that, and there was a couple of other defensive, tackles or whatever that were sort of played more than they normally did, right? So they essentially had a big package on Derrick Henry, and they managed, all of 16 carries for 80 yards. Like, he's still on a per play basis, did pretty well, but it was just enough to kind of have the Ravens go, like, we're not going to give Henry the ball 25 times.
Which was a mistake.
Is, you could see,
which was a mistake.
Probably a mistake. I also would say that Lamar Jackson should have been running on designed run plays a little bit more. But the other thing that happened was, anytime Derrick Henry came out and Teron Johnson came in, and the Bills got a lighter on defense, and they handed the ball to Justice Hill, he ran for 10 yards a carry.
Yep.
Right? So it's like, if Justice Hill can do this, kind of anybody can. Like, I don't mean just the
for sure.
the name of Justice Hill, unless the other, like I said, the Ravens are still a big team, even when it's not Derrick Henry running the ball, right? Yeah, just schematically and just personnel wise, the Bills were like, all right, like, if we're gonna get beat here by the Ravens, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do something to try to change things here, and that something again was just enough to win, right? So surprise personnel attack, 3 turnovers, and they still just barely win. And so I look at that and go, like, that's probably not a great sign for the Bills. So all that is to say, I don't love the Bills' defense. I love the Bills' offense to not turn the ball over. I love them to sort of be able to score against the Chiefs. I like that in this game, other than last week, where we were on team total under Kansas City 25.5, because we knew that Houston wasn't going to put enough pressure offensively on the Chiefs for them to, like, need to score in the final 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I think the Bills do that this time around, right? I think the Bills score. I think the Chiefs score. I think we're going to get that back and forth type of game that normally in this matchup, we're looking at like a 50-point total, 51, something like that. Because you're like, oh, we are headed for 28-27 or 31-28. People don't feel that way about this. Whereas I think in this matchup, I think that's kind of an interesting way to feel, especially when this total is only 47.5. I think both of these teams can get to that 24-25 number pretty easily on each other. You're not going to have the 10-minute drive that the Houston Texans had last week that helped us out because it wiped out a sixth of the game and didn't allow the Chiefs to score, obviously, because they didn't have the ball. I think this is, listen, it's not going to be an explosive game necessarily, but there are going to be yardage sort of chewed up here. Everybody's going to be involved for the Bills. More people are going to be involved for the Chiefs. There's a weird scenario last week where Mahomes only completed passes passes to 4 different guys. This is a guy who's normally completing passes to 7 or 8. So I think both teams, are going to go for it on 4th down. They're going to have success going for it on 4th down. The weather, while cold, you're not going to. There's no snow game potential, I don't think, over the course of this entire weekend in either sort of departments here. Yeah, man. I think the over, which is kind of like feels like that kind of whatever square play, like the over in the Bills and Chiefs. I think there's enough sort of interest or respect for the defenses here, and maybe some kind of not so much trust in either offense because they don't have that explosiveness.
Yeah.
But again, I think if you're pushing each other to all the way, and there isn't going to be one. Neither of these teams is going to be sitting there going like, "Yep, we got our 23 points. Like we're good." Like the Chiefs did last week, right? Where it's like, I don't think the Texans can score 23 points on.
And the Bills too. The Bills kind of did too.
A lot going on there.
The Bills kind of did too. They really hung on for dear life at the end there. They weren't doing much late in that game either, right? On offense.
That's right. And once the Ravens are kind of like, okay, like, the Henry thing, like we got to kind of get out of that, and we're going to throw the ball here pretty consistently. And they're like, the Bills are like, you know what? We're not really good against the pass. We're not really good against the run. We can kind of scheme it up here as best as we can. We're kind of pulling like the emergency, ripcord here.
And Lamar balled out.
Different personnel group. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the part that's crazy, right?
Mahomes can do that too.
Yeah, and that's the part that's going to be super interesting to me. And when I just think of like what the difference is, I'm trusting in the institution of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes over Josh Allen and what's my guy's name? Why am I drawing a blank? Sean McDermott. Wow. McDermott, yeah. I could see him.
Yeah.
I could think of him. But like he has panicky tendencies from time to time.
Yep.
He's not really all buttoned up, we'll say, from time to time. Whereas
the thing, you're gonna say that you trust Andy Reid a lot more in this, in all that situation, et cetera, et cetera. But I was just gonna say, like, the thing that bothered me the most retroactively about the Andrews drop, beyond the fact that the Ravens didn't have a chance to win, and I was on the Ravens in that game, was not getting to see the last 90 seconds.
Yes.
Of what that game should have been, right? Yep. Could have been. Like, what were the Bills going to look like in a 2-minute drill? Because I think that would have been really nice to inform us about this game, right? Like, if we're talking about a team that needs to get down the field and do so quickly and get into a position to score, like against the Ravens defense, that would have been a really cool sort of data point, if you will. Yep. And would they have been able to do it? And like, what would have happened? Would they have turned the ball over and maybe the Ravens get a chance, or maybe just nothing happens, or maybe, it's the Chiefs game from a few years ago where both teams get the ball back in that last minute and a half because they have to punt or, stuff like that. Like, it would have been really, really interesting before we even get into the idea of getting to overtime. So that was a real bummer in that game because that would have helped us out here a lot when it comes to like, what's McDermott capable of doing when it comes to like managing timeouts and managing all of that stuff? Yeah. Because honestly, we haven't really seen that all that much this season. And Shell, when we have seen it from the Bills in these close games, Texans game, Rams game, right? It's the thing that we don't like about the Bills. Yeah. And, when the last thing that we see is them giving up a touchdown and then getting bailed out by a drop pass, that data point doesn't help us sort of feel any better about the Bills.
Yeah. And
so again, if my stance is going to be like Sean McDermott's going to burn them one way or another, late game Sean McDermott's going to burn. Man, like I can't talk you out of the Chiefs.
No, for sure. I also think it's perfect too how, if I'm the Chiefs, it's almost perfect how good Kelsey looked last week, because now it forces Buffalo to like, not that they already weren't going to focus on Travis Kelsey. That's not what I'm saying, but we haven't seen that Travis Kelsey in a very, very long time. Nope. And I do think
very much turn back the clock. Yep.
Yeah, I do think though that they're sitting on some stuff here, like Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, Worthy, like there's some stuff there that they're sitting on that, we haven't seen yet that they're just waiting on. And I can't stress enough. The Chiefs the last few years, their run game in these playoff games where they'll just grind you down. And Pacheco is healthy. Kareem Hunt's had a crazy year that surprises everybody. And I just think that's going to be the difference in this game. But again, who knows? That's why they play the games. That's why we watch the games. That's why we enjoy the games so much. But before we get there, my friend, where can the people find you online to get more of the information they so crave?
Yeah, man, the window's available over at Substack. So go to substack.com, download the Substack app, type in the window, Matt Russell, sports betting, all of those, any of those keywords will get you where you need to go. And of course, at mrussauthentic on Twitter/X, that will get you also where you need to go. And when it comes to these games, like we're getting ready for the Super Bowl like a couple weeks early when it comes to the number of props that I ended up coming up with these games. And maybe it's because we are so familiar with all these teams. We're going to even be more familiar with these teams for the Super Bowl, at least 2 of the 4 teams, of course. So I got 6 player props in the Chiefs-Bills game. No, sorry, 6 in the Commanders-Eagles game, and 7 player props in the Chiefs-Bills game. And that's before we even get to the anytime touchdowns, which obviously feature guys who have been prominently involved over the course of this season. Because, when you feel like there's value on a certain player, like Xavier Worthy, for example, to score a touchdown, and they don't really change his odds week to week, even though he gets dedicated plays to him near the goal line, whether or not they score or not, then you're just going to keep going with that theory, right? So there is some repeats over the last few weeks, and there's also some fresh ones. So interesting markets across the board with some of these guys who, we've been sort of talked out of different bets because the odds have gotten crazy. I'm going to give an example. De'Ami Brown, his yardage total went up 10 yards from last week. It's like, that's the type of thing where like when you go over on De'Ami Brown and you cash and you win, it's like, cool, but like, we're probably not going to get that opportunity the next week, and you got to go find something else. So yeah, we found some other things, and we've got some stuff that, we've won with before, we felt good about before. So go check that out. 2 different articles. Subscribe over at substack.com, and it comes straight to your inbox, or you get an alert on your phone.
Really appreciate you, my dude, rocking with me today as the time.
Of course, buddy.
Bounced around.
Fake cough to prove. Cough to prove that he's not feeling well.
Imagine that. That. I wish I could be that good of an actor.
It's like you're calling in sick right now. Oh, sorry.
Right? It's like, sorry, Raptors, Hawks. It's like, sorry, Raptors, Hawks. Until next time. No, but I appreciate you for sure rocking with me as the time moved about like 8 times today. But we had to get the pod out and, did everything possible to make sure that we could bring the people the picks and the information to hopefully, have a successful weekend. You can follow me online on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Shell Alexander. And of course, like, follow, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your podcasts. It's Apple, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Because as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.